The music's on, the disco ball has dropped, and it's time to get this party started. You're listening to episode 3 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery After Party podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. I'm your host, Heather Barker, and with me at the turntable is my co-host, the only Gorn safe from the wrath of Captain Lorca, I hope, Jeff Hewlett. Jeff, how are you doing tonight?
Well, tonight I may actually sound a little more like a Gorn. I'm a little under the weather. Forgive me, everybody out there, for my voice sounding a little nasal or hoarse, but you may get a little of the real Santa Gorn here tonight.
You're just going to grunt all your responses.
Yes.
All right. Well, glad to have you here by my side. For those who aren't familiar with the podcast, we're a community-based Star Trek discotheque of sorts, focusing on each episode of Star Trek Discovery as they air. Tonight, we'll be discussing episode 4, The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry, perhaps the most epic title in all of Star Trek history. With us to talk about the episode are 2 members of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook, which is the exclusive gateway to gain admission onto the show. Our first guest did exactly that after finding us on Twitter and joining the group. Our great friend and returning guest, Carl Wonders. Carl, thanks so much for joining the group, and congrats on winning a spot on the show. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Heather. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you back to talk about Star Trek Discovery and not the Orville. Our next guest appeared on episode 25 of Shore Leave, our Star Trek Convention Community podcast. That episode was titled Managing Conventions with Anxiety. Our friend from both the Nerd Party and Trekmate networks, that is Matt Hansen. Matt, welcome back and congratulations on winning.
I'm so excited to be here. You know, it's been years since I've gone club hopping, but if I have to go back to any discotheque, the Star Trek discotheque is definitely where it's at. So I'm very pleased to be here.
Nice.
Thank you. We are the grooviest place to talk about Discovery out on the intranets, and we will get to that in just a moment. But first, we have some announcements from our DJs. That's Jeff and me. As we've mentioned, DiscoTrek is community-focused and evolved from our desire to give fans in our convention community a way to talk about Discovery. So, to enter for your chance to join us, make sure you're a member of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook. Once you do that, you'll see a new post every Tuesday with the DiscoTrek image and information on the following Monday's recording time. Just comment on that post to be entered, and we'll use a random generator to pick 2 winners on the following Saturday. Once you've been on the podcast, you can't enter again, but there are ways to be part of the discussion. Jeff, do you want to tell people how to do that?
Sure. So we'll make an additional post on the Monday following the broadcast of Discovery on CBS All Access, asking for your comments that we may include at the end of that night's recording. And also, you can call into the show and leave a 2-minute voicemail, up to 2-minute voicemail, at 609-512-LLAP. That's 5527. So 609-512-5527. Heather?
Do you want to let people know a little bit about our Patreon and what we've got going on?
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. So, yeah, we do have a Patreon page. We've mentioned it before on the show. You can find it at patreon.com/the-tricorder-transmissions, or you can visit our websites, the-tricorder-transmissions.com or shortleavepodcast.com, and click on the Patreon link to get there. If you like what we do here on DiscoTrek or any of the Tricorder shows, please consider supporting us. And we've just released our first reward level for all patrons of the show, and it's available now on the Patreon site. It's the pre-release access to unedited versions of our shows. So, for instance, this show we're recording right now, which everybody will get access to tomorrow, will be available to patrons of our show tonight, immediately after we record this in an unedited format. And we're going to be releasing some back catalog stuff as well, some unedited versions of our back catalog. In fact, there's an unedited version of our recent Doug Drexler interview, also posted for patrons on our Patreon site right now. And before we forget, we have some shout outs to some new patrons. We have Bill Smith from the Trek Geeks podcast. Thanks so much for supporting us, Bill. Our co-administrator and the Facebook group, Jesse Okendo, and great friend of the show and STLV attendee, Mr. Josh Duffy. Thanks to all of you for being patrons of our show.
Yeah, we're very, very appreciative of your support. Thank you so, so much. So now that we've got all that out of the way, it's time to talk about Discovery. Please keep in mind that from this point forward, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't watched last night's episode, go ahead, put us on pause, go watch it and get yourself back so you can listen to the discussion. Just a quick rundown of the show. Our show is a general discussion about the episode that's segmented into 3 parts. We have Drop the Record, which will be opening remarks and reactions to the episode. Play a New Track, which is where we'll explore what we learned that's new about the Star Trek universe. And Spin It Again is where we'll look back at standout moments, scenes, characters, anything that we feel needs a little bit more attention. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and drop the record. Let's talk about our reactions to last night's episode. Matt, why don't you start us off and tell us what you think?
Well, guys, I've just been loving this series. I know people have had some problems with it. They had, the darkness hasn't meshed with everyone, but this is exactly kind of what I wanted from a Star Trek series that it made now. And because I'm a huge fan of DS9, and this feels to me like DS9 taken to the next level in the 21st century. But as far as the episode last night goes, what I really admired about it, and I had this feeling last week too with Context Just for Kings, but what I liked about it is that it's still the new Star Trek, as in like what Discovery is trying to do different with the universe. But, they're starting to incorporate more and more of the themes from past series where you have, for example, a monstrous creature that isn't what it seems. It's very Horta-like. Really just the deepening of the characters. I'm so on board for this series so far. And I love this episode.
Awesome. Carl, what about you?
So I definitely agree with Matt about, liking the series overall. I actually think this one didn't quite hit the bar as much as the previous episodes did for me. And a lot of it is, I think, the problems that typically come out of a serialized storytelling where you have all these balls in the air, but you're not quite getting full pictures of anything that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I also think this was, and Matt alluded to this too, that I really felt like this was the most Star Trek episode we've had so far, as far as the main story goes with the tardigrade creature, and I even did write, Horta-like in my notes as well. So we're right on the same page with that, where you have this seemingly monstrous creature that isn't really as monstrous as we all think it is. Overall, relatively positive as far as the story goes, but there are definitely some problems I have with it that we can certainly get to down the road.
Awesome. So because I know Jeff so well, and I know that his favorite episode is Devil in the Dark. We've had 2 mentions of the Horta. Jeff, would you agree with Carl and Matt?
Yes. So I did wind up liking this episode more than the previous one. Still, like Matt said, it's still dark, but I like the focus on the technology and making things work. And of course, it does bear some similarities to Devil in the Dark, and anybody who's listened to the Tricorder before would know that is my favorite episode, and Jim Morehouse, by the way. And I think that one of the reasons why this episode resonated more with me is because it really brought up a real world issue that's close to my heart. And I mean, Heather too, I know you're passionate about animal cruelty. So I like the fact that they set up the moral dilemma with this god machine that they're making that's supposed to help them win the war with this incredible technology, but there's a price that they have to pay for using it. And that is damaging or killing this poor creature. I'm already Team Ripper on this one. So, and I'm sure that when some of the other characters on the show come up on the opposite side of that argument, I'm going to start to dislike them more.
Oh,
but I'm sure Lorca is going to stand on the other side of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely like the fact that Burnham was curious enough and compassionate enough, despite her Vulcan training, to find this creature's gentle side, even though it was clearly the only way to make that technology that they need to defeat the Klingons, or so they think they need to make that work. So it's a really interesting tug of war in my mind, and I really like that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I'm going to take a little bit of what everyone said here, because I definitely I'll just say the first time that I watched the episode, I did not want to go back and watch it again. Every night I sit down and I just watch I sit down, I watch the episode, I let it all sink in. I don't take notes or anything like that. And then I go back for my second watch where I take notes and pause and reflect and stuff like that. And unlike Context for Kings, where I just wanted to watch that like 4 times in a row, I didn't want to go back and rewatch this one. And I think that a very large part of that was the eventual abuse of the tardigrade. And Carl made a good point in that because this is not episodic, we didn't get a resolution there. And so what I really struggled with was watching Ripper, which I hate the name Ripper.
Yeah, I didn't
I
like
just
it
want to.
either.
Yeah.
It felt so out of place.
Well, let's not also too, it was given that name by someone who, of questionable character to say the least, who despised the creature. So it wasn't the name that like Burnham gave it that name.
I wish that it had been because it's just brash and I'm like, I don't like it. But watching it in distress and watching Burnham know that it was in distress, I kept waiting. I kept waiting for her to take action, especially from a character who we know is reactionary. Like she sees something that's wrong. She wants to take action right away. And I know that she couldn't do that because reasons, right? She can't go free it from the chamber in the middle of a jump because that could put them all at risk and potentially maybe destroy the ship. We don't know. But I feel like in a regular episode of Star Trek, that's what would have happened. She would have intervened. She would have saved the creature. And, in the end, we all would have had this understanding that, yes, the creature's not a monster and everybody, lives happily ever after, like in Devil in the Dark. And that's not what happened here. And so for me to go back and have to rewatch that, I really wasn't looking forward to it. And I think that part of that goes even into a bigger picture of the episode, where in the beginning, the character that named Ripper, Landry, right? Is she Commander Landry?
Yeah.
Commander Landry.
Yep.
Right. So we met her in the last episode, and I think the general reception of Landry was that we don't like her.
Nor are we supposed to, I don't think.
Right. There's not really anything likable about her. I love seeing the presence of all these strong women characters on the show. So even though I didn't like her, I was still intrigued by what they were going to do with her. And, her interaction with Lorca, we kind of thought, oh, well, maybe there's something going on there. And then I had read that, oh yeah, there's going to be some development there. So when we see her, walk in and sedate the creature and then go for the weapon, and I don't know about you guys, but I immediately knew what was going to happen.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then she's dead, and I kind of felt like the whole point of her being there was just pretty pointless. And it really frustrated me because I was disappointed to see a character that maybe I didn't like, but I wanted to know more about, that I just met one episode ago, be gone in this episode.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I mean, this is one of the issues I have, I think, with serialized storytelling. And they even said, everything's up for grabs. Anyone can go at any point. And, I think it's especially unfortunate to have another female character of color be the one that gets offed. You had Captain Georgiou in the first 2 episodes. And obviously this is Commander Landry is obviously not a similar character. She's not a likable character. Right. And the sense I'm getting, I mean, I haven't done an exact head count here, but you kind of have the Captain Lorca side of things, and I think you have what's going to become the Commander Burnham or former Commander Burnham side of things with the crew. And I'm almost smelling kind of a Admiral Pressman Phoenix scenario here.
That's exactly what I think too.
Yeah, where they're going to turn on the captain eventually, the crew is, because he's forcing them to do this experimental, almost means of travel that may be dangerous and doesn't really care, and it's all in the name of advancing Starfleet's cause in a war
Yeah.
A real war this time as opposed to a Cold War with Pressman's case. But it seems like that's the way, and we're slowly offing the characters who are going to be sympathetic to Lorca. I would not be surprised if by the end of next episode, Stamets is on Burnham's side. There was a scene that I was going to bring up in the next segment that, clearly he's changing his opinion of Burnham, I think. And,
well, Stamets never liked Lorca to begin with. That was pretty clear last week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I liked the fact that in this episode, we did get some answers to some of the questions posed last week. We know that the Discovery was a science vessel, is no longer a science vessel, and is now a warship, which I think, we all assumed from the last episode.
Yeah.
And that Stamets said, that's not the mission I signed up for. I'm not a soldier. And that the entire ship was designed around his scientific specialty. So this ship and the Glenn then were designed specifically for this displacement activated spore hub drive experiment, we'll say it is.
Right.
Which I kind of meant to mention in the next part, but definitely in those interactions, we start to see a bit more of Stamets' true character, as I'll call it. Last week on DiscoTrek, I tried to take the side of Stamets and saying, they're in a war that he didn't sign up for. And so that's why I really understood why he was not being the nicest person ever.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely nice to see that interaction with Burnham, and then to actually see his true love of fungus.
Yes.
Well, that's what I liked about him this week, is that you saw more of the love of science with him, which I think is going to be that character's not saving grace, but like one of his more pleasing features. Because I got last week that, yeah, he's a little off-putting, but with the development he got this week, I can kind of see that, they're in the middle of the war, and he's also upset that because I'm willing to bet he didn't design the spore drive to be used in the war. He designed it to further Starfleet's mission. Now he's being forced to use his greatest discovery, no pun intended, as a weapon of war. Yeah. And given how he feels about being a soldier in general, yeah, I would think that would make him upset.
Yeah.
And then once he realizes that it's actually taking a toll on their supercomputer brain for it, I think he's going to be even less apt to want to use it for the war effort.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So this kind of leads me into the next section, if you guys are ready to move on. What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so let's move over to Play a New Track, where we explore what we learn new about the Star Trek universe. So I don't know about you guys. The first time that I watched the episode, I had a bit of difficulty during the Klingon scenes catching up with all of the captioning or the dialogue.
Oh, I'm just saying, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I know this is a problem that a lot of people have. And well, I do kind of understand. I mean, my feeling on the Klingons just speaking Klingon to each other is that their whole motivation for going to war is to, it's to remain Klingon. It's about ethnic purity and racial purity. So I think it would be weird to have a war based around those motivations, but they still speak the language of the enemy to each other.
Yeah, we can talk about it a little bit more. I see both sides. I really love it. And I feel like it makes them even better and definitely more alien and even more menacing. But so what happened, I would watch and then I wouldn't catch all of it. I'd move on to the next thing. So I lost some of the dialogue. So when I went back for my second watch, I turned on the closed captioning. And that's where I discovered that they eat human beings. And I know that they're starving, and so they really needed to eat anything, but it was really difficult to come to terms with the fact that they ate my beloved Captain Georgiou.
I know, but it's like you said, here's the thing. I've always loved the Klingons, but if we're completely honest with ourselves, throughout most of the time we know them, they're a bunch of I don't want to say this like completely negatively, but they're a bunch of posers. They like to like talk a big game. They like to throw their weight around, but I've never really been scared of them. The thought that they eat the dead of their enemies, which they said before. I'm pretty sure they've talked before about like eating from the heart of your enemy and stuff like that.
So, yeah.
But to actually know that they take that literally, that would like for the first time, I think the Klingons are scary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons, like from the minute that we saw what they looked like, even I said, these are my Klingons, because they do look, and I don't want to get into a whole thing about how they look, but they look similar to the JJ Klingons. And those Klingons were menacing. And I was like, I hope that's what they look like. So we've got the look, and now we're getting to know them. And yeah, I would not want to run into them in space. So I completely agree with you. I think I just had a difficult time with it because I love that character so much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, but I mean, like it's horrifying, but it does so much to set up your enemy. Now I know that we're going to get to know them further down the line, and we're going to see both sides of the story. But I mean, if you want to like just set up just a visceral reaction to how dangerous someone is, having them be cannibals of their enemies is pretty good.
Yeah. Carl, did you have any comments about that?
I mean, I kind of had the same reaction as you, where I was a little, horrified by the whole development. But I also see, Matt's point in that it does certainly make them more terrifying. As far as the subtitles go, I thought it was a interesting device in the first couple episodes, but I think I said before, like, I think they should just do like a Peter Firth move like they did in Hunt for Red October, where all of a sudden they just say we're going to speak in English now, but they're really speaking Russian. And I think they should do the same thing with the Klingons at some point, because at least for me, I'm having a hard time taking in all of the really great visual work that they're doing with the Klingons and the sets and everything when I'm reading subtitles the whole time. I mean, I like the sound of the Klingon language. I think the fact that it actually is a language that has rules and makes sense, and a lot of work went into it. But at the same time, I think it would be a lot easier of a show to watch if they did just switch over the language at some point, and with the acknowledgement that they're only doing it for our benefit. They're not really speaking English to each other.
Right. I mean, if they did something like that, I think it would be fine. Like I said, I just think that it would be problematic given that, the motivations behind this entire crusade of theirs is racial purity. To have them start speaking English to each other, that seems counterintuitive. I mean, it helps us as audience members. It seems counterintuitive for them in universe is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that I know there's difficulty, and I think Jeff probably agrees, like trying to read and then trying to watch.
No, I totally hear them. But that being said, I really got to commend these actors, because I mean, the makeup is probably like the worst Klingon makeup that's been in the history of the series, just in terms of time and comfort and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, they really like they got the language pretty down. Like, I don't speak Klingon, but the fact that the language seems to roll off their tongues pretty well, especially one of my favorite parts of this episode was getting to learn about L'Rell.
Yeah. Let's talk about L'Rell.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Let me roll back one really quick second to the Klingons eating. So I had two conflicting interpretations of that, and of course, the first interpretation is the one that you guys all brought up, and that was Klingons eating humans or eating their enemies. But I was scratching my head wondering, because of the context of the conversation that they're having when they mention it. It almost seems like it could have been interpreted as a revenge thing for her being one of the people that was responsible for killing Takuvma, their messiah. I wasn't sure if what they were doing was to, enact some sort of avenging type of a thing on his behalf on her by eating her, or if that was just something that they normally do. Maybe down the road, if we find out they eat more humans, that blows that theory out of the water.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do know they were starving, so they needed to eat whatever they could eat. So I think there's a lot at play. I think it could be that. I think it could be just the Klingons have done it, and this is just the first time we've really really got an upfront discussion about it.
Well, I mean, like I said, in the original series, Kirk talks about how, the Klingons, they're such barbarians, and I'm like, well, they're more brutal, but I wouldn't call them savage until now.
Yeah. Okay, back to Laurel. All right, so, and I'm saving her for the end, but that's okay, because I am completely taken with her. I thought that Mary Chieffo did an amazing job, not only of, talking in the makeup, but, facial expression in that makeup.
She's a great actress with her eyes. That's what I noticed from her performance.
Yes. I thought that, I was really kind of just, I don't know that I was surprised by what all happened with the Klingons, but surprised by Vok, because when we met Vok in the prologue, we'll call it, he seemed like a very strong, very sure warrior. Obviously didn't have much of a reputation, was an outcast, but stuck his hand in the fire, proved himself, became the torchbearer.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to see a different version of Vok the minute that he welcomed Cole onto the ship. Just the whole, what is T'Kuvma's house is your house. I know that the Klingons, his house of the Klingons now are wanting to join together, but I just found it kind of odd that he welcomed him on and believed everything he was going to say. What did you guys think about that?
I mean, to me, Vok to me is like this zealot who is a very good follower, but has no clue how to lead, and is so taken in with T'Kuvma's whole message and everything in his mythos and everything that all you have to do is play to that and he will go along. So, when Cole comes back and so easily gets in Vok's good graces, and I even wrote, I'm like, this is not going to end well, is what I wrote in my notes.
Right.
And so when he comes back from the harvesting the warp core and everything, and it's like, yeah, what did you expect was going to happen, buddy? And to Laurel, I don't quite get her end game with either, unless she thought she was going to be outright killed by not siding with Cole right from the immediately, because she kind of joins in, plays along, and then immediately goes back to Vok and is like, and now she's going to help him apparently in some way or another. So I'm not quite sure what her thought process is there. I'm sure we'll find out down the road.
I was just going to say to your first point, Heather, about Vok. Yeah, I totally see what you're coming from, but at the same time, he was willing to become T'Kuvma's apprentice, for lack of a better word. But just because the spirit was willing, I mean, he didn't have any time to learn from T'Kuvma before he was killed. And he had this now that this leadership role is thrust upon him because, he did choose him as his successor. So, I mean, inexperienced guy now leading this war. So, I think that we're seeing a leader who had not had any opportunity to benefit from watching other people lead.
I think he had a little too much faith in the people who were following T'Kuvma and the fact that they would just follow him because he was the chosen successor. He had too much faith in them that they wouldn't be able to be swayed by anybody else. And then he was surprised when he came back and found out that, oh yeah, it didn't take much to get them to follow a new leader.
I mean, to me, he's very, not quite the right analogy, but he's very book smart. Like he knows the teachings of T'Kuvma, but he has no experience actually living it. Yep. And I mean, to the point where when we first meet him, he's ready to just starve to death on the ship because he is unwilling to go and harvest apart from the enemy ship, which, is great for, I guess, for, ideological purity, but it's not really the way to lead a group of people.
Yeah, no, he's not a pragmatist. He's an idealist. And to the point about Laurel, she says something near the beginning of this episode that I found very interesting, and it informed the rest of the way I saw what she was doing. Yep. So she goes into this little monologue about her backstory and that how she was born, a member of two houses, and one of the houses were like the great deceivers or something like that, the manipulators, the House Mackay.
Yeah.
And so my feeling is that, to coin a very cliched expression, the female of the species is more deadly than the male.
Yeah.
I think she's the master manipulator, and I think she's having all these guys. She's going whichever way the wind blows to suit her own purposes. I think she has an end game in mind.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I was just going to mention in that monologue, she said, she built a bridge between the houses to serve both of them. And so I think that very clearly came into play when, she seemed to side with Cole and then popped back over to Vok. And then now she's going to take him to these matriarchs, which I am so thrilled to see. I'm really excited about that. But I completely back what you said, Matt. I think there's motive there. That's why she doesn't want to be the leader, and that's kind of what she said. She wants to be on the side.
By the way, I didn't believe her when she said that. I mean, I get that, I know what she said in the moment, but like, I think she's trying to make Vok think that she's not a threat. You know what I mean? I don't want your throne. I don't want your leadership. I'd rather stay behind you and support you.
Yeah.
I think that she's far more clever than any of the men.
Yeah.
Well, and she's definitely working a game on Vok, and it's working because of that whole scene where she says, I could be your protector. I could be this. I could be your go out and campaign for you. And he just has this look in his eye, like I think he's smitten at this point.
Oh yeah.
And there's that really fun. I don't know if it was meant as a double entendre, but when she says, "Shall we uncouple?"
Oh yeah.
And he just kind of blinks and then.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. We're trying to do a job here.
I was like, that's a specific word choice that I was like, there's got to be something. There's got to be something to that, and I'm willing to bet that how she beams to the Shenzhou at the end of the episode and says, if Cole finds out I'm here, he'll kill me. Cole knows. I'm willing to bet anything Cole knows this is part of her plan.
I'm so intrigued by what's going on. For some reason, Vok and L'Rell remind me of Rom and Lita, but like super dark versions. There's something about, Rom was kind of came into his own over the entirety of DS9, and Lita was kind of standing by him. I think that L'Rell's going to be much more vicious than Lita ever was.
Sorry, zooming really back out. This may be a kind of a goofy thing to say, but I have to say that I really enjoy the fact that they're making the Klingon storyline intriguing and interesting, just like they're doing with the Starfleet side. So I was a little bit worried that the Klingons were going to get a little bit pushed to the side and maybe only get, not even a quarter of each episode. But I really like where this is going. So I'm equally interested to see what's going to happen on both sides.
For sure. Okay, so why don't we move on? Like, Carl, what did you find in this episode that was new about the Star Trek universe?
Well, you kind of hit the point I was going to make. So if I'm allowed, I would like to flip it around on its head a little bit, and say that for all the talk of how this isn't Star Trek, this is different, this isn't what quote unquote the fans want, et cetera, I found it strangely comforting to know that the Starfleet way of defending themselves has remained consistent throughout all of the shows, where you have Korvan 2, which is, by the way, a very nice Easter egg from the Next Generation, is responsible for 40% of the dilithium refinery, yet it's apparently not very well defended. And once again, they find a creative way of making the Discovery the closest ship in range, in that even the closest ship in range won't get there in time, so we need to use this magic new travel technology to get there in time to save them. So it was one of those things where it's like, no matter how things change, some plot points will remain the same in
plot convenience.
Be the Star Trek we know and love, in that Starfleet sometimes just is not very good at their job when it's not the main cast that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's classic Star Trek, right? We warp in just at the last minute, and the bomb always stops at 1 second. It's one of those things.
Yeah, I think that these episodes have a lot in them, and I love that they do. I love the action. I'm engaged throughout the entire episode. I feel like if this had been more of an episodic show, we would have seen more of the people. Like, we got a little bit of the people down on the planet, but I don't know. Like, we didn't really learn a whole lot about them. It was just kind of, we pop in, save the day. Oh, who saved us? I don't even know. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, all right.
So,
There's been plenty of episodic ones where they just rescue someone and they don't really learn about them. I mean,
yeah,
it didn't bother me that much, only because it's like, well, these are some of the tropes that I'm used to.
yeah.
So, I'd like, if I could, I'd like to ask a question. And Jeff, you brought up the interweaving of the Klingon storyline and it, and keeping interest. It's actually one of the things that's starting to nag at my head a little bit as I'm watching, where I'm wondering if it would be better served to spend the episode that we're watching on, let's say, the tardigrade story, and have a Klingon episode down the road that is 99% Klingon with a little bit of the Discovery crew, just to give each story enough chance to breathe, because I felt that in each of the plot lines there was opportunity to do a little bit more with the story had they been given the extra 10 minutes of the episode that they could have had they, instead of trying to balance the two, do one or the other. Other episodic, or not episodic, but serial shows tend to do that at times, where they say, we're going to focus on this group of people in this episode and kind of push the others to the side a little bit. And maybe they'll do that down the road. But I really felt in this episode that both of the storylines would have been better served had they focused on one and not the other.
I was just going to say, normally I think I might agree with you, but what worked for me in this episode is that both stories were working on the same common theme. And for me, the common theme that I found in this episode is idealism versus pragmatism. You have your idealists on both sides, that being like Vok for the Klingons and Burnham and what I'm sure is going to be her faction of the crew. Fighting for what their ideals are, versus the pragmatists like Laurel or Lorca and Landry, not worrying about the ideals, just get things done so that we can win this war. And so that really worked for me.
Yeah, I don't know. Following along with other modern serial shows that have done that type of a separation in episodes, namely shows like Walking Dead, I find myself kind of losing interest or losing track of at least one of the storylines,
right?
Because there's so much time dedicated. In one, you get like a whole 1 hour episode on some other thing, and then you have to rely on the whole. Well, last time on Star Trek Discovery, blah 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 blah, to catch me back up again. If this was a Netflix show that all dropped at one time and you could just binge the whole thing, then yeah, that would definitely work. But I think since we're being held on a weekly schedule at this point, I'm kind of favoring the way they're doing it now.
All right. Matt, did you have any more input on things that we saw new in the Star Trek universe?
Well, a little bit, and it's something that's new and yet something that feels familiar. And we talked about the characters, we talked about how the universe itself deepens, and all of that is wonderful, and I love the show for it. But like some of the quote unquote cool things about this episode were, I like this idea of the return to like, for lack of a better word, the aerodynamic starship. In the sense that the sense when Discovery, that when its saucer rotates, it reminded me of like Voyager's warp nacelles when they go into warp. It was just something cool that they've added that I don't know, it's those little touches that make me happy as a fan. And also too, speaking of Voyager, not only did I get a lot of Horta in this episode, I also got a lot of Equinox using these creatures that we don't understand for our own benefit.
Yeah, I've seen that mentioned several times. I thought it was really cool to see what I lovingly call the disco ball. I thought that was really neat, and I thought we got some other cool technology, like when they did the in the cold open, and they open on this graphic, and you're like, what is going on? Like, is this a storm? Is this?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know what it was.
Standout moments.
Yeah, then we find out that it's the replicator making her uniform. I thought that was pretty cool. And then I also really liked the hologram mirror in Burnham's quarters.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I thought that was pretty neat, and I had not seen that before. We had a mention of the Hawking radiation firewall.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we'll ever find out what that is. Perhaps not.
And Elon Musk got a shout out. It was from
Yes.
Cochrane.
I noticed
Yes,
that
it did.
too. Yeah. So that was kind of fun. But that I think those were really kind of the standout things for me. Jeff, did you have any that we didn't touch on?
Two things. One, I like that we're getting more drips and drabs of what Lorca is really like. Some of his backstory. I like the fact that he's the captain of a science vessel, but he spends so much time studying war and weapons. So that's interesting. I think it's going to really come full circle here soon. And now that he's really declared that they're a warship. Let's see. And also, this is a little strange, but I like the fact that no matter where you are in the universe, if somebody wills you something, it follows you there. It comes in a box and it verifies that it's you when you open it. I guess it's not, you don't have to go to the hearing anymore or the reading of the will to get your stuff. It just comes to you.
No, not when there's space UPS.
Yeah.
Yes.
All really cool stuff. So let's go ahead and move into our last segment. Let's spin it again and look back at some standout moments, characters, whatever you got. Carl, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so a couple of things, little small ones. I've really enjoyed the one-liner writing, and I don't mean that quite as a joke, but I feel like there's a lot of really good standout quotes that have been sprinkled throughout most of the episodes, including this one. The ones I wrote down were when Saru says, "My ganglia remain unconvinced," when Burnham is saying that she's not going to be a problem, and I think what might be my favorite Stamets line so far is when they're going to confront the tardigrade and he has a phaser and he says, "Think of it as a placebo for my skepticism."
That's really good.
Which I think it's a great line of dialogue for that character.
I liked it. Like I've always wanted to talk to my mushrooms.
Yes. The little banter that he has with his, I think the doctor is his partner.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. When he just says the frontal lobe is overrated.
Yeah. You could see what I wanted to see in that. They don't really come out and explicitly say there are a couple yet, but I can tell that the doctor is going to be a nice balancing force for Stamets because he can get a little. We saw last week he could get a little carried away in his own head and his own ego, and I can tell he's going to be a good balance because right after he talks about the frontal lobe, he's like, "Well, I'll leave it intact just in case you decide to have a feeling sometime."
So good, good.
And then Stamets had one of my other favorite moments, and it's a really minor one when they let the tardigrade wander into the mushrooms, and he has this smile that just slowly appears on his face where you could see he's finally doing science again, I think, where he's like, this is what I'm here to do.
This is what he likes.
This is what I love doing. And I thought that Anthony Rapp, who's been he's always good in everything I've seen him in, but he does a great job just conveying these little things like that.
Can I just say now that I'm on this podcast, I have no idea if he'll ever listen, but he's been so awesome with the fans on Twitter, just so open with all of us. And I know he's had to take abuse from some of the peanut gallery fans, but he's been such a trooper and so kind and so warm. So, if you're listening, Anthony, thank you very much.
We love you.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Anything else, Carl?
Going through my notes here. I'm sure they'll come up during conversation. But that's all I got really.
No one's talked about mine yet, so I'm hoping I can go.
Please! I don't want to take everybody. So please,
jump right in. Go ahead, Matt.
I knew what my standout moment was the first time I watched this episode because it is the first time that Star Trek has earned genuine tears of emotion from me since the opening of 2009, and that's Georgiou's final speech to Final Will and Testament to Burnham.
Yeah.
I love Michelle Yeoh, and I love that character. She's been with us for what, 2.5 episodes maybe. Yeah. But there's so much to that character that I find so endearing. And that eulogy, well, it's not a eulogy, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It blows something like Tasha Yar's out of the water. I'll say that much. Yeah. But that was just so well done. I thought that was the perfect note to end on. And she represents Giorgio, I think she represents what Starfleet is going to become. You know, the idealistic future. And I think that Burnham is, because she received this will, she's going to be inspired to do that. So some of the problems that you had, Heather, with the fact that she didn't let the creature out, Giorgio says something very specific, is like, but most important, take care of those under your care.
Yeah.
And she's not a captain, but this creature is under her care.
Yeah.
So my feeling is that, the series is going to come full circle, where we started off and she was a mutineer for the wrong reasons, and I think she's going to end up as a mutineer for the right reasons.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I've been saying as we go through these episodes, and forgive me for offending anyone, but if you can't find, the positivity, the hope, the optimism of Star Trek in Discovery, you're just not looking hard enough. It has been in every episode. It's been in the writing. It's been along with Michael Burnham, despite her actions. She still carries a lot of that within her and what she says. It's in characters like Tilly, but this message from Giorgio really represents that. And I feel like now hopefully people can see that this is Star Trek. It's going to evolve into what we know.
We're getting there. That's the thing, is that I think people don't realize, is that, we're so used to non-serialized storytelling with this franchise, but this is the first time we're trying this new experiment, if you don't count like Enterprise season 3. But this is the first time we're trying this self-contained story, and it wouldn't make much sense if we just started off as we already were in TOS. We have to get there.
Yeah, we do.
I think that the journey, the fun, the discovery, pun fully intended this time, is going to be how we get there.
Yeah, for me, Star Trek has been so much of who we want to be, who we want to be in the future. And right now, I think Discovery is very reflective of who we are.
Right.
It's so spot on, with just putting a mirror in front of our faces.
Which is what Star Trek is supposed to do.
Absolutely. And they've always done it, as a metaphor, as, oh, well, this is how we are in the future. And, this is how we evolved. And we still struggle with some of this, but we're an evolved people. And right now we're not quite there yet. So for me, I really, can I just say this now, guys? I really think that Discovery is my Star Trek.
I think so too. I'm willing to say that at this point. Like, I'm trying to not let the recency effect bias me, but like right now, I have to say that like DS9 and Discovery are neck and neck for me. I'm waiting to see how this season ends, but this is I'm so happy because this is exactly everything I wanted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love hearing it. All right. Was there anything else that really stood out that you want to just do a special shout out for again?
I would like to give another shout out. I did it last week on Twitter, but Tilly is such a character that could easily be written to be so annoying. She could easily be the Mayweather or the Harry Kim of the series. But what I like about her is that, yeah, she has her own personal foibles, don't we all? But she knows how to do her job, and she's incredibly perceptive for someone of her age. I love the fact that it's her who motivates Burnham to listen to the will.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's such an earnestness to her that isn't there. And, Harry Kim was just naive and inexperienced and kind of bumbling at times, and it became frustrating. And I thought Mayweather was very similar, whereas, she is still young, but she recognizes like her own faults, and she recognizes a lot in other people. She's going to
grow.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff, did you want to pop in with anything?
Well, two things. One, this is kind of an overarching longer term sort of thing that stood out to me in this episode, that was something I was wondering about from earlier. And one of the points that I had made on I was on Discovering Trek for one of their shows with the Trek Geeks, and one of the things that I said there, that was for the first episode, was I was curious to see how they were going to get from Klingons in episode 1 of Discovery to Klingons that we know in the future. And now this episode of Discovery, I was scratching my head thinking, how are we going to not let the spore drive be a thing at the end of Discovery? Like they have to get rid of it somehow. And I think this brings up maybe how the spore drive is going to wind up being either outlawed or decommissioned at some point, so that they don't have to address that in the future. I was lamenting the sequel / prequel thing, but I like thinking about how we're going to get from where we are today to where we know we're going to be in the future.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to leave as my parting thought is that, like you said, Heather, there's a lot of people that can't find the hope here. But for me, the hope isn't so much as it was in TOS, where like, here's where we'll be in the future and all that sort of stuff. Given our current political, social, world climate, whatever you want to say, things are not good right now, to say the least. So, and things are not good for Starfleet and the Discovery in this. So I think the hope from this series is not who we are in the future. It's that the fact that as bad as things are, we can still get to that point in TOS. Hope is not lost.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about this as you've been talking about, and especially Matt, you saying, this and Deep Space Nine are really, your two favorite shows. And Deep Space Nine is certainly my favorite now. I'll have a better opinion of Discovery further along. But to me, it almost seems like that old saying of like things go in cycles. And there's a lot of like the Inter Arman Enum Salient Legis episode or Section 31 or Admiral Layton and those types of people in, Captain Lorca and the people that are pushing this agenda where, they're like, maybe we are a science-based, organization, but in war, we have to win at all costs. In times of war, the law falls silent. I completely agree with you that the arc of the story is to get to the bright light at the end of the tunnel that is the world of TOS. You're not gonna start there. You have to get there some way. And I really like the idea. I hadn't thought of this where you said that Captain Georgiou is going to be the example of what that person is going to be like, and hopefully Michael Burnham will reach that point by becoming more like her as we go.
Yeah. So I guess I will kind of wrap up this part of the discussion. I don't know if you guys noticed, and I don't have the exact dialogue, but there was a little Lower Decks shout out there when they were talking about finding Ripper, the tardigrade, in the Lower Decks. And then the first time that she mentions it, it's just in conversation, but then she kind of calls it out. And it just stood out to me. And it did because so many people have been referring to Discovery as a Lower Decks type of theme, where they're not necessarily following all of the main officers on the ship. So I don't know that was really meant to stand out. It just stood out to me. But we've kind of covered a lot of what I have. So I'm gonna do a little shout out to the fact that we got to see some new crew members of the Discovery this time. On the bridge, there are 4 that I have names for, aside from Dr. Hugh Culver, who we met and who we talked about earlier. I watched most of After Trek, but somehow I missed. They did a little screenshot of each of these 4 characters from the bridge with their name, their station, if they were human, if they were alien, etc. And so Kayla Detmer, like she had been on the Shenzhou.
Right.
She's the one that we saw in the last episode in the mess hall. She's got some kind of an implant that I assume is from an injury.
From that battle.
From the battle, yeah. So we see her. She's a con officer now. We see the character Ariam, who a lot of people thought was an android of some sort. She's actually an alien. Well, shoot, let me find. So I tweeted out the little screenshots of who everyone is, and I should just refer to those and not to my notes. I wrote spare notes. All right. So Ariam, she's Lieutenant Commander. She's the Spore Drive's officer, and she's an augmented alien. So it doesn't say what species alien she is. And I definitely understand why people thought she was like some kind of a robot droid, because she has kind of that sound to her voice. She's the one that kind of had the helmet on.
Oh, the Daft Punk helmet?
No,
that's a different character.
Yeah,
okay.
She kind of looks like a cross between like a robot and a Binar on the Discovery Bridge.
Yeah, okay, yep.
Yeah. So there was that character. There is okay, I'm going to try to say this name and not butcher it, but Joanne Olosekon, Lieutenant Junior Grade Ops Officer. She's
the African American woman.
Yeah. And then we had the guy that everyone's talking about.
I know. This is like I was going to say. Claire was just on this rampage last night on Twitter, and I'm like, I don't know what you want, girl. The guy's hot. Why not have him on screen?
Our buddy, his name is Milton Richter. He's a lieutenant. He's a communications officer, and I found that hilarious because I said the same thing to my partner. I was like, who is that dude? Like they just keep showing him standing on the bridge. Like he wasn't even really reacting during these reaction scenes.
He did, he did react when they won the battle at the end. Because I did notice that, like, thanks to Claire, when I rewatched this episode right before we did this show, I was paying attention to him because I really didn't notice him the first time.
Yeah.
But if I were the camera, I would cut back to him too. Just
I think that's a pretty popular opinion, but I thought it was really cool. And I mean, it doesn't in any way make up for losing like two of these, main women of color characters, but it's still nice to see diversity on the bridge and more women. And I'm also kind of excited that all of the officers are young. Obviously Captain Lorca is a little older. The captains are older, but it seems like everyone else is younger, and I think that's kind of neat. And also, kind of shout out there to Lower Decks.
Well, there is also. I mean, you have to figure that, like, I wish we saw more of this during the Dominion War, actually, but you kind of figure, like, some of these people are being drafted, or, like, they're fast-tracked through the academy because they need the people.
Yeah. And, that kind of calls back to a point that Jeff was talking about with Captain Lorca. I wondered, like, was Captain Lorca actually the captain when Discovery was commissioned to be a science vessel, or was he moved over once they went into war?
Yeah,
that's a good question. We'll find out.
I almost want, it was like, like kind of like a Captain Jellicoe scenario where they said, this guy needs to be in charge of this crew now because the mission has changed,
Section 31 could have pulled some strings.
They could have,
get this guy into the captain's chair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just find it very odd because obviously he's, he studies war. He said that he studies war and has his little shop of horrors. Which, quick shout out to my friend Lisa on Twitter, because she tweeted earlier today. Let me find the picture. And just so everyone knows, Lisa is Star Trek Rec. She tweeted a photo of Lorca and Burnham in Lorca's shop of horrors, as I like to call it. There is a Horta. Like, I am.
There is?
Yes. On the table, yeah. Behind Burnham, right?
Yep, it's in a case, and if you look at it, it looks like, Pizza Monster Horta. So no one else has really called that out. I definitely didn't see it. I thought that was pretty awesome homage.
See, just like the attention to detail is great.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely amazing. And, every episode has these Easter eggs, and I feel like, I need a gosh, what would it be? Third, fourth rewatch at this point to sit down and pick out every single one.
I have a feeling like DS9 now, once the season is out, this series is going to be awesome for binge watching.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've been having a hard time, like, not going back and just rewatching all the episodes before the next one. I may have already done that before this one. All right, so I think I will go ahead and wrap this up with my final shout out, and that is to the ongoing theme of Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
I've mentioned it since the first episode, this theme of her being lost, much like Alice is lost. And this episode really brought it home with the tardigrade. When they're studying the tardigrade, she and Landry, she notes, she said, how do you know it's a monster? and said, "You judge the creature by its appearance, by one single incident from its past. It can only be what it is, not what you want it to be." And I went back and did some Alice research. And I just want to say this little quote that I find really works with this episode. The quote is, "In Wonderland, Alice struggles with the important." Let me start over. "In Wonderland, Alice struggles with the importance and instability of personal identity. She is constantly ordered to identify herself by the creatures she meets, but she herself has doubts about her identity as well." And I kind of wonder if she sees herself in this creature at all, but also just how she's coming to find herself when, meeting this tardigrade and seeing that it's hurting, and she knows that it's hurting. And just like that little connection with Georgiou saying to take care of,
those under your care.
Those under your care. It just kind of all comes back to me. And I hope that made sense since I kind of read it strangely. But I thought that was really neat that here she is meeting this creature, having to confront herself, what she I think we know what she needs to do. And I think that she eventually will. I think that, we're going to see her redeem this creature, look out for this creature. I'm really enthralled by the ongoing theme of Alice, and curious to see how it all plays in at the end of the series, or the season, I guess.
Right. I mean, I know he hasn't written any of the episodes yet so far, but that feels so Nicholas Meyer to me, just alluding to old books and old literature. That feels like something he probably had something to do with, and it works just as well here as it did back in Star Trek 2 and 6, I think.
Awesome. All right. Jeff, do you want to take us on out? Because you're better at this than I am.
Sure. So, guys, thanks for being here, and congratulations on winning once again. So, Carl wonders, can you tell people where they can catch up with you on social media if they want to talk more Discovery?
Sure, I can be found on Twitter at Carl Wonders, just one word all together. I have a blog that is on temporary hiatus at the moment, but it can be found at listeningtofilm.net.
Cool. And Mr. Matt Hansen, where can people find you if they want to chat Disco?
So they can find me on Twitter at mhansen0207, Hansen. Also, I sometimes co-host the Filibuster on the Nerd Party Network, and I more frequently co-host Upper Pylon 2, a DS9 review podcast on the Trekmate Network, which has been very fun. But I must say that now that new Star Trek is out, it's kind of hard to go back and talk about old when we can sit here dissecting the new. Yeah. Not that I don't love DS9, but I mean, it's tempting.
So Heather Barker, how about you?
So on Twitter, I am LLA Posper, and then, and just so everyone remembers, pop over to the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group, where myself and our good friend Jesse and you are moderators. We will let you write in and look out for our DiscoTrek posts so that you can comment and be entered to pop on the show.
All right, and I am Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter if you're looking for me, and you can find the show at tricordertransmissions.com, shortleavepodcast.com, and you can also find us on Twitter at disco_trek. And don't forget, our voicemail number is 609-512-LLAP. We look forward to hearing from you guys so we can read some of your comments at the end of the show. And I guess that brings us to the end of DiscoTrek, and we'll be back with you guys next week, same time, same place.